Oh, hello. What? Hello, webcam. Give me a sec. Let me just turn that off and turn that on again. Hello. There we go. Let's just sort out the webcam. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Are we ready for Singapore? My favorite race of the Formula One calendar. It's on the wall. Slightly changed in that that final sector is now different, but only for a couple of years, and then that will be right again, hopefully, unless they decide that this orientation is just better and they never go back to the previous orientation ever again, and then I'll have to get a brand new light. Hello from Stockport. Hello, Ian, mate. How are you doing? Are you ready and raring to go? Under the lights at Singapore, the cars just look exquisite. I mean, I just can't understand how this isn't everyone's favourite Grand Prix, if I'm honest. It just looks stunning and is probably the most difficult one. Like, if you really want to test drivers' ability, put them on the trickiest track. The complete opposite to Monza, which effectively just 5 straight lines. Now, got a little bit of difficulty, some corners to contend with. Hello, 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 everyone. Just getting my stream set up for you. I got a little qualifying board. Yes, we're ready. We're there. We're good. Excellent work. Shall we talk about the drivers heading into this weekend? Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez. So Max Verstappen, by the end of the Japanese Grand Prix, if he is 180 points ahead of Sergio Perez, then he will be world champion. It would be interesting, especially considering he was crowned champion in Japan last year. If he's crowned champion in Japan once again this year, that would mean that Sergio Perez kind of has to make a couple of mistakes over the course of the next 2 weekends, although it's looking pretty unlikely because Sergio Perez is looking good and the Red Bull is looking 50-50 at best. I know that Max Verstappen said earlier on in the season that Singapore was a race he was a little bit worried about when it came to this Red Bull package, but it really isn't going their way this weekend. Hello, Jamie, mate. How are we doing? Hello, hello. Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, the Red Bull really not looking at its 100% best in the free practices that we've seen so far. Just really struggling with the car, Max Verstappen. I know that he likes a pointy car, and the Red Bull car is very pointy. It's very difficult to drive going into corners because that initial turn of the wheel allows the car to change direction very swiftly. So you have to be very delicate as you go around the corners. But Max Verstappen's usually pretty decent at that. I mean, he's won 10 Grand Prix in a row for a reason. He's been able to get the best out of that Red Bull car. But at this point this weekend, seems too pointy. Couple of times now we've seen him just go into a corner that little bit too heavy, lose the rear end of that Red Bull car, and just not look comfortable with the overall package. And then Sergio Perez said the same thing. Said it just feels very delicate going into the corners. Feels like you're going to oversteer at literally any moment. And you have to kind of back off from where you want to be right on the edge, especially around Singapore, where there are very, very many walls that you can smash into. You know, just ask Nelson Piquet. There's a lot of walls that you can smash into around here. And I just don't know if the Red Bull is going to be as quick this weekend as we expect it to be. I think maybe this might be a little bit of a turning point. Oh. And Max Verstappen literally being asked now, are you confident going into qualifying? He says no. Just hasn't been the weekend that he was hoping for. And you know what? He's already got the 10 wins in a row. He's already got the World Championship basically sewn up. I know that he'll want to win this weekend. But, you know, if he doesn't win this weekend, I don't think he'll be completely and utterly heartbroken. Then we kind of move down a little bit. Fernando Alonso looked really quick in the free practice sessions, although obviously FP3 isn't a real idea because it's so much hotter and it's not under the lights actually during the day or during the evening in Singapore. So We'll have to wait and see whether Fernando Alonso can translate that. I think the Mercedes looks a little bit better, but if anything, George Russell looks a little bit better off than Lewis Hamilton, although in the standings, Lewis Hamilton just nearly 60 points ahead of George Russell, 55 points ahead of George Russell, but George Russell looking really good this weekend, and the Ferraris looking impressively quick this weekend as well. They just have been able to get so much more traction out of the corners than I was expecting them to be able to. I don't know whether that's just the peaky nature of the Ferrari and the way that they have been able to just turn up one weekend, completely flop the next weekend with no real idea of why or how that happens. But the Ferrari this weekend just looks really stable going through the corners. They did have a little bit of an upgrade coming into this weekend. They upgraded the front wing of that Ferrari car, and maybe that's just been enough. Maybe upgrading that front wing has just been that final piece of the puzzle for Ferrari this year to really find the consistency that they required, because that was the main thing. The main thing that Carlos Sainz always used to talk about was the fact that when you were going into a corner with the Ferrari car, especially from weekend to weekend, you just didn't really know what you were going to expect. There was no real consistency. Even if it was the same kind of corner, you never really 100% knew what kind of Ferrari car was going to be underneath you that weekend. But now they found a little bit more consistency. They found a slot where the drivers can find some performance in that Ferrari. And Charles Leclerc even said the setup this weekend has been slightly different to how they'd set up the car normally. And maybe that new way of setting up the car has just allowed them to find that window of performance a little bit quicker. Lando Norris looks really good as well. I didn't realize that Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri were not going to have the same McLaren car this weekend. So Lando Norris has the full upgrade package that McLaren have bought, basically an entire new body kit for the McLaren car once again this season at Singapore, trying to push themselves even further forward than the jump they were able to make earlier on in the season. They're only on Lando Norris's car. I thought it was going to be on both cars. They were trying to make it so that it was going to be on both cars, but unfortunately couldn't get the parts finished in time for Oscar Piastri. So Lando and Oscar are definitely driving very different McLaren cars. Lando was the quicker driver anyway, so whether or not that will mean a huge difference in the two, not too sure. I think that we'll still see Lando obviously outqualify Oscar. By how much is kind of the margin, I guess we're waiting to see. We've then got Lance Stroll in 9th place. Is he going to be able to hold on to that 9th place as the season progresses? Obviously, we've got Singapore, Japan, Qatar, Austin, Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, Abu Dhabi left. We've got quite a stint left to go in this season, and it just doesn't feel like Lance Stroll is anywhere near the points a lot of the time, and therefore Pierre Gasly, Ocon, Piastri should all suit this track better, probably, than Lance Stroll. Have cars underneath them that are pretty decent around this Singapore track. It wouldn't surprise me if one of those three managed to jump in front of Lance Stroll, and it wouldn't surprise me if all three of them managed to jump in front of Lance Stroll over the course of the next few races. Like, Lance Stroll needs a big performance in that Aston Martin car, and I just can't see where that's going to come from. Alex Albon is an interesting one in 13th place. The Williams having a really tough start to the weekend. Engine problems on Friday for Alex Albon meant that he didn't get to run in free practice 2 at all. And when you're coming into a weekend as tough as Singapore, especially considering he didn't really get a full feel of the Singapore track last year either, because he was still recovering from that appendicitis and basically had surgery just before the Singapore Grand Prix. Probably not the best for Alex Albon, but I feel like 21 points will keep himself ahead of that pack behind. The Haas car looking impressively quick, considering, you know, they haven't got the upgrades this weekend that the AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeos do have. And then Logan Sargent kind of in that mix with those cars towards the bottom of the standings as well. Red Bull can actually win the Constructors' Championship this weekend, which I think is quite an interesting one. They do need Mercedes to basically not score any points. So Red Bull would need a 1-2 with Mercedes not scoring any points, or Red Bull would need a 1-2 and fastest lap, and Mercedes would have to only score 1 point this weekend. I feel like that is very unlikely because George Russell's looking really, really quick indeed. And then we've got the Ferrari-Aston Martin battle, but the Ferrari looking quick again this weekend. I thought this would be an opportunity for Aston Martin to bounce back at the Ferrari. Not looking like that's going to be the case. In fact, I think Ferrari might be kind of eyeing up a little bit of a look at the Mercedes car if they can over the next few races, especially if they can get themselves into contention with Lewis Hamilton a little bit more often, and especially George Russell kind of finding a bit of form is going to be tricky for Ferrari to do that, but we'll have to wait and see. And then McLaren and Alpine, Williams as well to an extent, kind of in a little bit of a no man's land between them. Can't imagine Alpine getting 60 odd points and jumping in front of McLaren very easily. Can't see McLaren getting a 100-point swing on Aston Martin either. Can't see Williams getting like a 60-point swing on Alpine. So I feel like all three of those guys kind of slotted 5th, 6th, and 7th will stay there for the foreseeable future. And then everyone's got eyes on that Haas car. Obviously, Haas not bringing their upgrades until Austin. So 3 Grand Prix where Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri are going to have their upgrades, where Haas are not. Haas only ahead by 1 point to the Alfa Romeo team. And AlphaTauri just need to get themselves back into the mix. I know it's been a terrible season for them in terms of driver lineup. Like, they've had Nick De Vries in there, then De Vries replaced by Ricciardo replaced by Lawson. Lawson is in once again this weekend because Daniel Ricciardo's still out, looking like Qatar is going to be the earliest that we'll see Daniel Ricciardo back in the car. So Liam Lawson will have to take part in 4 Grand Prix, although I'm sure he's not complaining about it. But let's get into qualifying, shall we? We started to see cars taking the tyre blankets off tyres and preparing themselves for this weekend's qualifying session. Of course, standard qualifying, Q1, Q2, Q3, any choice of tyres that you like. So it's not like the hard, medium, soft qualifying that we saw last time out. But we will see a lot of soft compound tyres being chucked onto these cars, and the Ferrari team sending their drivers out early on. The Red Bulls also out there as well, and a queue beginning to form. I think Stroll might fall behind Piastri by the end of the season in points. I think Stroll will fall behind Piastri, Gasly, and Ocon by the end of the season in terms of points, to be honest with you. Feel like all 3 of those guys right now I would back to score more than 10 points, and Lance Stroll is just looking so far off the pace over the last few Grand Prix weekends that I just don't know how we can see where he gets that pace from. I like that the Mercedes car's got a little hat for George Russell. Interesting one. I guess maybe to keep his eyes out of the light. I have no idea. Why have they got that little hat on the Mercedes car? Does anyone know? Basically, George Russell sitting in the garage, and obviously over the halo, they've put kind of a blocker to block the lights above George Russell, keep him in the dark. Maybe keep him cool, but I can't see that making too much of a difference either. It's got to be something to do with the lights, right? There is the Gulf Williams coming out at the front of the pack there. Absolutely beautiful livery. I do love a Gulf livery. They do just smack it out of the park every single time around. Maybe next year when the Gulf Williams collaboration becomes even stronger, we'll see more full-time Gulf colors on the Williams car, because a little bit of that light blue, a little bit of orange in there as well. It's just a beautiful combination. We have got the Williams car coming out and being at the front of this pack. They've also got a Haas then behind, and AlphaTauri as well. Both Haas's actually. Hulkenberg and Magnussen both out on track. The Alfa Romeos then behind that. Lando Norris comes out onto the track. And now the Red Bulls joining in too. Max Verstappen coming out of the pit lane behind Sergio Perez. Just trying to find a little bit of space, I feel like. It's going to be fairly traffic heavy this first Q1 session, as we say all the time in Q1 sessions, as all 20 cars try and find themselves some positioning. But even more important that you get it right this weekend, because the track is quite narrow at sections and difficult to overtake other cars in front, especially if they're on an outlap and going very slowly. You don't want to be held up by anybody. And I'm sure undoubtedly we're going to see some cars getting held up Golf colours match your logo nicely. Thank you. Yeah, but pretty close actually. Maybe should have gone for a slightly lighter blue. But I just do love the blue and orange combination. I mean, I'm a McLaren fan as well, so it kind of makes sense. Although the McLaren livery this weekend, I'm really not sold. The like blackout McLaren livery. I just feel like they could have done anything that would have been more exciting, to be honest. Like when you're sitting down, you're like, okay, we want a special livery for Singapore, maybe something sparkly, you know, maybe put like a sheen on it or a glittery effect on it. And they were like, nope, just black. Just take all of the paint off the car. So, okay, it's a little bit dull, isn't it? Whereas Williams have gone for something special with that Golf livery. Lando Norris getting underway in the McLaren car. That first sector, of course, completely resurfaced. You can just see that. The car's swinging through those first few corners at a much higher speed than we're used to. Obviously, these new ground effect cars do have the bonus of that additional downforce too, kind of carrying that extra downforce into that first couple of corners. But Lando Norris absolutely flying in the McLaren car and is going to set the precedent, you would imagine, for these top teams in what is expected from them in this Q1 session. Of course, we're only looking for the bottom 5 drivers in this one. So 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th will be knocked out of this qualifying session, and 15 drivers will continue on to Q2, allowing them to try and reset their positions for the future. Sargent and Magnussen come across the line. Sargent, I feel like, on quite a slow lap there, maybe backed out of the lap towards the end. Magnussen and Hulkenberg, though, 133, 2, and 7. Liam Lawson comes in, also in the 133.6s. It's incredibly slow laps from these guys. Just going nowhere near as fast as this man here. Lando Norris going to come across the line, and that's more like it. A 132.5 is a little bit more exciting for us moving forward. If we kind of look at the details of that with Lando Norris' sector times, you can see just incredibly quick in that first sector, as I was saying, from Lando Norris in comparison to those other cars that had gone around. 27 seconds the lap time, whereas you look at maybe like a Valtteri Bottas, 27.9, losing over half a second already in that first sector. Although Magnussen, Lawson, Bottas going around again and slowing themselves in. Hello, Sally. How are we doing? Haas can have a good weekend. It's going to be tricky for Haas just because they're the only team kind of in that bottom 3 that hasn't brought a big upgrade. AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo, huge upgrades to their floor and rear suspensions. Ferrari, an upgrade to their front wing. I think Red Bull also had an upgrade to their floor. There's quite a few teams that have brought extras to this Singapore Grand Prix, whereas Haas obviously waiting until Austin, so another couple of Grand Prix time. George Russell now out for the Mercedes team. I've got one eye on George Russell, actually. I feel like he could do something a little bit special here this weekend. Just looks very comfortable in that Mercedes car in the free practice laps that I've seen. Watched a few onboards of his fast laps during free practice. Ferrari is especially losing a little bit of time, kind of stumbling through the middle sector. And we saw Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz almost lose it in the middle sector when they were going for fast laps earlier on in the day. So whether that will be the same here, we'd obviously hope not. Charles Leclerc's gone fastest so far. But George Russell, you can see that 27.1 first sector, purple in that first sector. Sergio Perez currently fastest in the middle sector. Can George Russell go any better than the Red Bull? Charles Leclerc, though, the aim at the top of the standings. So close to the walls, George Russell, really finding his groove in that Mercedes car. And you can tell, just really happy with the balance of that Mercedes. Charles Leclerc just in front of him on the road there. The Ferrari moves out of the way of the Mercedes. He comes through the middle sector. Oh, it is so close to Charles Leclerc's time. There's 0.03 of a second between George Russell's flying lap and Charles Leclerc, who's currently on provisional pole right now. As Russell's coming through that final sector, much quicker final sector now that they've removed 16 through 19. And George Russell across the line does go quickest. And as I said, so incredibly close. 0.04 of a second. Lando Norris also within a tenth of George Russell. Sergio Perez within a tenth of George Russell. It is so incredibly close at the top of the standings right now. 4 drivers within a tenth of a second of each other. Then Lewis Hamilton in 5th place, just a couple of tenths off. Oh. Lance Stroll on the radio. Impeded by... I can't see what that was in front of Lance Stroll. Oh, thank you so much for the subscription. Appreciate that. Where did that... Akshat, thank you so much. Although I just realized that the track key I've moved because the Singapore track, that we'll put it here. We'll put it there. Oh, Esteban Ocon within millimeters of the wall there. See, this is why I just love Singapore, man. It has the kind of Monaco feel where the walls are incredibly close and you see the drivers literally millimeters in terms of the precision that they need to get the best lap around here. But at the same time, you've got the kind of night race feel, the cars under the lights. Oh, it's just beautiful. All 20 cars currently on track as Pierre Gasly is now on an outlap. Tsunoda, Ocon, Alonso, Gasly, and Albon, the only driver, not to have set a time so far. Ooh. Logan Sargent, 7 tenths off George Russell's time in the middle sector, but he will improve on his time dramatically, you would imagine. Although there is quite a lot of traffic through this final sector, as Esteban Ocon is just finding out, as everybody else starts their flying lap. The Alpine finishes his, and Ocon goes 8th fastest, so slots in just ahead of Carlos Sainz behind Oscar Piastri. Logan Sargent, 11th fastest. Can his teammate Alex Albon do any better? No, 13th fastest. Alex Albon still just not 100% confident, you'd imagine, in that Williams car after missing so much of the free practice running on one of the trickier circuits on the calendar. Yuki Tsunoda goes into 9th place with the upgraded AlphaTauri. Nico Hulkenberg goes into 11th. Magnussen 12th, dropping Logan Sargent back down to 13th. It's Bottas, Stroll, and Zhou, the drivers that have completed flying laps that are down in that elimination zone. Alonso has technically completed a lap, but was a second warm-up lap for the Aston Martin car, is now on his first real flying lap, Fernando Alonso, and you can see that difference in the first and second sector times there. When Alonso comes across the line, he's definitely not going to be the slowest driver on track. Gasly goes quick, 6th place, and Fernando Alonso then jumps up into the top 5 and almost within a tenth of a second. Lando Norris goes even quicker and goes within 5 thousandths of a second of George Russell. Max Verstappen, though, turns up to the party and goes 0.08 of a second quicker than George Russell. We now have the top 3 within a tenth of a second of each other, and then Leclerc and Perez and Alonso within 2 tenths of the fastest time. So it is incredibly tight right now at the top of the standings, although it's the bottom 5 that we're most interested in. Lance Stroll still in that elimination zone. Sargent, Albon, Bottas, and Zhou down there as well. I wasn't expecting the Williams to be very quick here this weekend, to be fair. Does not suit their overall package style. The Alfa Romeos will be a little bit disappointed with that, though. Huge upgrades to that Alfa Romeo package, but not quite able to get it going in the first set of flying laps, as we see everybody finishing up, coming back into the pits, resetting once again, getting themselves a fresh set of soft compound tyres, you'd imagine, and we'll have a little bit of a shootout towards the end of this qualifying session. 6 minutes to go in this one. Liam Lawson there, taking part in his third Formula One Grand Prix, and what a difficult one to take part in. I know that he had Zandvoort in horrible conditions. Oh, Ocon radio. Touch the wall on the left side. Ooh. Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a touch there on the left-hand side of the Alpine car and the wall. Yeah, that is that's definitely a hit on the Alpine of Esteban Ocon. That is taking some paint off the wall there, is Esteban. There is an incident involving, it was Logan Sargent in front of Lance Stroll. Impeding will be investigated after the session, so have to wait and see. Really tight quality at this moment in time. The top 10, half a second or so, as you say. The top 9, just 0.3 of a second. So, all very, very tight right at the top. And it does make you wonder, because they've taken out... So, like, if you can see on my camera, they've taken out this section here. So, in the third sector, you kind of come down. Instead of having to do this right, left, left, right, you just go straight through there now. And it's definitely added a little bit of tension coming into actually now what is the final couple of corners down here. Because you're carrying so much more speed into here that I think the braking forces on the car are so much different than they were before. And it's actually making the drivers think about it slightly differently. And it is changing the way in which you'd completely approach that final third sector. Carlos Sainz quickest then. Here's Zhou Guanyu coming into the pits or out of the pits. Can't really tell from this very, very close up of Zhou Guanyu. Hamilton and Russell both on scrubbed sets of soft compound tires. So assuming that even with the track improvement, I should mention it did rain earlier on in the day in Singapore. Very, very unlikely to rain now. Almost zero chance of rain during this qualifying session. But it did rain before free practice, kind of early morning, mid-afternoon. And therefore the track will be very green. Less grip out there for the cars. And therefore the track evolution during this qualifying session will be quite drastic. And again, you want to be the last car across the line if you can be to get the absolute maximum amount of grip available to you from the tarmac, as the rubber melts off of these tires and fills in those grooves in the tarmac underneath and just makes it that little bit more slick and slippery for you. But it's what these tires like. They like to be able to stick to the tarmac as they hit that peak operating temperature. We're now seeing Sargent and Bottas kind of interchanging positions with one another. And Alex Albon... Oh, no, sorry. It is Alex Albon fighting with Valtteri Bottas for track position. Here we go then. Let's see. 2 minutes on the clock. A lot of drivers starting to move towards the end of the pit lane, get themselves back out there again. The Williamses, the Hasses out there early, giving themselves maybe a couple of shots at this if they need it. Nico Hulkenberg the driver that is most at risk right now. 133.1 from Nico Hulkenberg will be the target for Stroll, Sargent, Albon, Bottas, and Joe to improve upon if they want to get themselves through to Q2. Yuki Tsunoda, I haven't seen on an outlap though. And I can't see on my track map either. Yuki Tsunoda, happy with 13th? I wouldn't be too happy if I was Yuki Tsunoda right now in 13th place, but I can't see him on my tracker. Maybe that's just me. I know he is out there. Yuki Tsunoda's on a flying lap. That's okay. Just couldn't see him on my tracker for some reason. Maybe he was covered up by somebody else. Oh. Sainz ready and raring to go. Back-to-back pole positions available for Carlos Sainz. The first back-to-back pole positions of his career and the first back-to-back Ferrari pole positions since Italy and Singapore last year. So is it written that a Ferrari will be on pole position once again? Alex Albon having to just get through a little bit of traffic in that final sector and across the line. And Albon goes 10th fastest. Verstappen really unhappy about the amount of traffic in the final sector. And I don't know if Verstappen got across the line there. Just did Max Verstappen by a couple of seconds. And he will be last across the checkered flag. Yuki Tsunoda, woo, goes quickest. Hello, Yuki. We're turning up to the party right now, are we? Okay. Kevin Magnussen, second fastest. The track evolution of this is absolutely bonkers. Okay, so anybody could make their way through here if they absolutely nail their lap. Nico Hulkenberg goes second fastest of anybody. Ocon through the to fifth place. Liam Lawson has just gone quickest in the middle sector in that AlphaTauri. We're about to see a reverse grid all of a sudden. No, because Sergio Perez goes into second place in the Red Bull. Liam Lawson, fourth fastest in that AlphaTauri. George Russell only sixth fastest. So Russell slower than the AlphaTauris and the Hasses. Oh, and there's Lance Stroll. And that is a huge shunt in the final sector for Lance Stroll. And that is going to absolutely ruin everybody else because that is a red flag. Valtteri Bottas, Oscar Piastri, Logan Sargent, Zhou Guanyu, and Lance Stroll are out. That is a huge shunt from Lance Stroll. I really hope he's okay. Luckily, it's after the pit entrance, so everybody can get back in safely without having to go through that debris. It was the final corner from Lance Stroll. And he's okay. Woo! Okay. But Lance Stroll in the wall. I just didn't even see that coming. It felt like they cut to Lance Stroll as he was going into the barrier. I don't know what happened there. It was the final corner from Lance Stroll. I'd love to see a replay to see whether there was a little bit of oversteer or understeer, whether he carried a little bit too much pace into the corner. Oof. But that is a huge, huge hit. Barry's did a great job, but the whole front wing, rear wing, entire left-hand side of that Aston Martin car completely gone. And it's the cockpit and the survival cell that just Formula One has worked on so much. And it's just proved dividends once again. Because the entire Aston Martin car is in pieces, apart from Lance Stroll. Oh, he just hits the curb. He hits the curb, goes on top of it. And that just sends the car sliding. I think there's no traction on that front left tyre at all. It bounces across the curb. That's not the Wall of Champions. It is not indeed. Similar to the Wall of Champions, though. In kind of very similar place. Final corner. Canadian Grand Prix. Final corner. Now at Singapore. And the Aston Martin team have a big job. I hope they've got, well, a spare car, to be honest with you. The entire left-hand side of that Aston Martin car has completely disappeared. Front wing and rear wing dislodged. There's liquid of some kind. I feel like that might be coolant. I hope it's not petrol coming out of the bottom of the Aston Martin. But unfortunately, that is going to be a big, what am I talking about? Cleanup. Big cleanup. Words completely gone from me there. But that is a red flag on the session. Luckily, or unluckily, depending on who you're a fan of, the checkered flag had already dropped. We didn't really get to see the full pace of everybody in that final sector there. Oscar Piastri, you'd say, is the biggest loser out of all of this. 17th place, he'll start tomorrow. Bottas and Joe in the brand new look. Alfa Romeo's also down there, 16th and 19th place. Logan Sargent out in Q1 once again. I know the Williams isn't massively suited to this track, but more pressure will mount on Logan Sargent once again. There's the front left tyre of Lance Stroll's car, completely sort of 20 meters away from the car itself. Obviously, the wheel tethers doing the job, and usually we see the wheel tethers hold on to those car parts, but that is a huge shunt from Lance Stroll and basically untethered the wheel from the car. Luckily didn't go over any barriers or anything like that, like we saw from the IndyCar race. That always scared the life out of me when that tyre went all the way over the barriers during the Indy 500. Aston management secretly hoping for broken fingers. They'd bring in Felipe Drugovich, would be the reserve driver that Aston Martin would have at their disposal. It'd be interesting to see how Felipe Drugovich would do. A lot of Formula 2 drivers getting an opportunity this year, aren't they? You know, we've seen Oscar Piastri come in, Formula 2 champion a couple of years ago. Felipe Drugovich, Formula 2 champion last year. Liam Lawson, actually driving in a Super Formula, but looking like he might go on to win the Super Formula Championship as Liam Lawson. That is if he's not still in the AlphaTauri car. I can't remember when it is now. End of October, I think, the final race of the Super Formula season. So if Liam Lawson's still in the AlphaTauri, obviously, whoever's second place in the Super Formula Championship would much appreciate that. Gives them much easier chance at winning the championship over Liam Lawson. But I'd imagine we'll have Daniel Ricciardo back in the car by then. Will Stroll race this weekend? I think, well, he will be fine. Lance Stroll seems to be fine himself. The driver will be okay. Whether or not the car will be put back together again is another thing. We did see this with Mick Schumacher. You might remember in Saudi Arabia last season. It was towards the beginning of last year, but he had a big shunt in qualifying. And unfortunately, he crashed the car in qualifying, that Haas car last season in Saudi Arabia. And the Haas team just decided they couldn't really get the car back together again in time in a way that they would have wanted to. So maybe we'll see Aston Martin do a similar thing. I doubt it, though, because there's a lot of championship points on the line. And the Aston Martin car looking a lot more competitive than it has over the last couple of weekends, you have to say. It wasn't very quick in the Netherlands, wasn't really very quick in Monza either. So you have to kind of wait and see whether they decide to get that Aston Martin back together again. I mean, they haven't got the Aston Martin shell off of the track as of yet. The tyre's completely dislodged from it, so it's going to be a full crane over. Luckily, that is right next to the pit lane, so might just crane it over and into the garage for them if they can. I'm sure the Aston Martin mechanics would much appreciate that. Get onto working on their car as soon as possible. Lawson isn't fast enough to win Super Formula. Isn't he literally leading the championship? Or is he second place in the championship? I can't remember now. Yeah, I think he's leading the championship as Liam Lawson in Super Formula. Pato O'Ward would be an interesting one. He does have the super license points with Pato O'Ward, so he could come in. Pato has been a bit of a weird one recently, though, because obviously he is a McLaren driver, is a McLaren reserve driver as well, but recently we've seen those free practice sessions go to Alex Palou, or at least last season we saw the free practice session in Austin go to Alex Palou. Alex Palou's supposed to do the free practice session again for McLaren, but unlikely with the contract situation. Verstappen still very unhappy. And Lando Norris just checking in, making sure that Lance Stroll is. He's second, but hasn't won in a while. I see. Yeah, but he's still in the mix. If you're second place going into the final race of the season, it doesn't matter if you haven't won in a while. If you win that one, you win. Tough track to bring in a rookie. Oh, yeah, they wouldn't bring in Pato for Singapore. Japan, be an interesting one. But yeah, Palou has been coming in for McLaren instead of Pato O'Ward, or at least was supposed to come in instead of Pato O'Ward. So it'll be interesting to see what McLaren do with that, because I doubt Palou will come in for his free practice test, to be honest. Oh, I see. So Lance Stroll actually maybe was pushing just that little bit too hard in the final sector. We're just seeing a replay of him starting that flying lap. Oversteer in the final corner. Let's see. Oh, he's understeering massively in the penultimate corner. Yeah, Karun Chandok just pointing out. You can see he turns the wheel, but the wheels are effectively pointing straight. And the car just bottoms out on the curb. And it's the front right tire of Lance Stroll's car over the curb. Loses that positioning. And just completely understeers. Tries to correct for it. Then a little snap of oversteer, sending the rear of the car around. And yeah, that's done and dusted for Lance Stroll for this Saturday. We'll see if the Aston Martin team can put it back together again. Those free practice last year they were, yeah. So Palou and Pato got one each in the McLaren team, but because Piastri is a rookie, they only had to give one this year, and that one was supposed to go to Palou. But I imagine will now go to Pato. So it'd be interesting to see how Pato does, considering he's second choice, technically. For this year, anyway. Just because they only have to do one free practice session with a rookie in the car. Because Piastri counts. That's why AlphaTauri don't have to run another rookie. Because they've had Nick De Vries in the car at the beginning of the season. And he technically counted as a rookie because he'd only been in one race before. Obviously, Monza last season. And Liam Lawson counts as well because he's taken part in the Grand Prix. Although Liam Lawson now can't do the free practice sessions for Red Bull because he's taken part in 2 Grand Prix. So it'd be interesting to see who Red Bull go for. Maybe Awasa into the Red Bull car for a couple of free practice sessions. Would be an interesting one. So, dominated Indies, way too OP. Yeah, Palou is very, very quick in IndyCar. It has to be said. I've got a little video about Alex Palou coming up, actually. Well, I won't spoil too much of it. Talking about it now. But very impressed with Alex Palou just in general. I wanted to see whether his driving style was applicable to Formula 1, because IndyCar, as much as IndyCar looks very similar to Formula 1, they are very different disciplines. And we've seen a lot of drivers go from Formula 1 to IndyCar, and they've been really quick in Formula 1 and then really struggled to adapt to IndyCar. And I feel like going the other way would be even trickier. So I kind of looked into Alex Palou and whether or not I think he would be able to adapt to the Formula 1 tests and trials that he would come under were he able to get a seat. And based on that free practice session as well and looking how he did. But yeah, Palou is just good enough. Palou has more than enough points. Yeah. More than enough points, has loads of testing with the McLaren team, and yeah, as you say, those free practice sessions as well. So yeah, Palou's more than capable of coming into Formula One. Oh, incident involving Max Verstappen impeding. Oh, Max Verstappen stopped at the end of the pit lane for a very, very, very long time, did Max Verstappen there. He sat there at the end of the pit lane by the green light, kind of obviously waiting, trying to give the cars an opportunity to move out of his way, but he was holding up the two Mercedes cars that were also in the pit lane just behind. So Max Verstappen a little bit naughty there. Assuming that Lando goes to Red Bull for 24, 25 maybe. Not 24, but yeah. Who will replace Lando? Mick Palou. I mean, Palou is out of the running now, because Palou has completely ruined his relationship with Zach Brown. And when you're trying to get into the McLaren setup, whether in any manufacturing sense, if you're trying to get into a McLaren team of any kind, be good friends with Zach Brown, and he's ruined that. Mick's an interesting one. Obviously, Mick has that relationship now with Mercedes. Mercedes do power the McLaren car, so they will have a little bit of a touch between the two. Also, Mick Schumacher is a reserve and test driver for the McLaren setup this season as well. We haven't actually seen him at any point with the McLaren team. We've seen him a lot with the Mercedes team, but he has been offered to the McLaren team. Do they need his services? O'Ward is an interesting one. Perez also is an interesting one, going into McLaren alongside Piastri. I think McLaren might... it's tricky. I feel like McLaren might try and entice maybe someone like an Alex Albon. You know, if Williams aren't still right at the level of McLaren at that point. Depending on the season that McLaren have next year, I feel like an Alex Albon would be like a fairly decent shout of a driver to come in alongside Oscar Piastri. Who else might be there? Maybe a Dragovic. Would you go Felipe Dragovic? So you'd have Piastri leading the team, though, with only 2 years of experience. That might be quite tricky for Oscar to be able to do. As good as Oscar looks, you know, it's only a couple of years in. He'd be in his third year of Formula One and then running the team. Perez would be interesting, obviously taking like a straight swap, Perez and Lando. I just don't know, one, if Perez would want to go back to McLaren. Doesn't have the best relationship with the McLaren team. He was there for a year after Lewis Hamilton left. So Sergio Perez replaced Lewis Hamilton, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. Was it Lewis Hamilton or Jenson Button? I think it was Lewis Hamilton. I think Sergio Perez replaced Lewis Hamilton at McLaren, but was only there for a year, kind of had a lot of contract weirdness, didn't really have a great relationship with the overall McLaren setup, although it was a very long time ago, so we'll have to kind of wait and see. But yeah, of those three, I think Mick would be the most likely, just because of the relationship that he has with the team already right now. But I don't think he's an amazing pickup. I don't think he's a good replacement for Lando Norris. Lando Norris has been one of the best drivers out there for a considerable number of years now. I would say that Lando Norris has been in the top 5 drivers for the last 3 seasons. And therefore, you know, bringing in a Mick Schumacher who was rejected by Haas, not the best look right now. I also don't know who else you'd want to bring in. Because, you know, you're not going to get Verstappen. You're not going to get Leclerc or Sainz. You're not going to get Hamilton or Russell. I think Albon is probably the best shout. If it was me, I'd try and pick up Albon to replace Lando Norris. I think Perez will stay for the 2024 season, yeah. He will not be out of Red Bull after Mexico. All the talk that has been happening. Nico pouring fuel onto the flames. I just think he'll finish his contract Because Red Bull, he's got the contract there for the 2024 season. I just don't see a world. I don't see a world in which Lando Norris gives up on this McLaren project just as it started to really catch fire. Like we've seen that this year, the new setup, the new wind tunnel as well, has really allowed them to take a little bit of a step forward and jump up into the mix for podium positions once again. They bring in Seb Vettel. Vettel at McLaren would be very interesting. Very interesting indeed. But yeah, I can't see Perez going already. Yeah, I couldn't remember too much about Sergio. Yeah, it was Hamilton that you replaced, wasn't it? Couldn't adapt, push the car in all the wrong areas. Yeah, I just remember it not going well. I don't remember too much of the ins and outs of that season with Sergio Perez. Oscar Piastri and Pierre Gasly fans in the Singapore stands. Lovely to see another Pierre Gasly fan. Gasly doing his best in that Alpine car. Helmet off, the Alpine driver. We're still waiting for confirmation of when we'll get back underway in this qualifying session. It's Fernando Alonso getting cooled down. Some dry ice being put into that Aston Martin, the sole Aston Martin now. 13th fastest Fernando Alonso, although the times right now don't really give us anything to go off of, because if we look at the times as they are, Lance Stroll, that red flag came out just as everybody was really going for those flying laps. And we saw actually the track evolution was ridiculous. Yuki Tsunoda fastest, Hulkenberg third, Lawson fourth, Magnussen fifth. Like those cars, you don't imagine would actually be getting pole position by the end of this Saturday. But Yuki Tsunoda maybe is in the mix. Zach was disappointed with below, couldn't keep his end of the deal. Definitely done something spectacular in the simulators. Yeah, I just feel like Palou was kind of set up to be the one, wasn't he? Like, I feel like if Lando Norris would have left, then Palou probably would have been McLaren's first choice. But maybe he's kind of... I feel like Palou must have some inside information, right? Or at least an idea of why he would then just completely rip up all ties with the McLaren setup. I feel like he probably knew that Lando was staying. He probably knew that he wasn't going to be able to get into the McLaren setup like anytime soon. But yeah, I could see Palou getting a Williams seat, especially if Logan Sargent really can't click into gear. Obviously, Logan Sargent out of another Q1 session. A little bit of a harsh one to judge him on, though, because maybe would have had a little bit more pace in that car. What was he? He was 0.3, though, off Oscar Piastri just ahead. I don't know. It's the most difficult track of the year, though, isn't it? In terms of being a rookie. But Liam Lawson is absolutely flying. Mate, so tricky for Logan Sargent right now, because he's being compared to Oscar Piastri, who's been absolutely insane. And then he's being compared to Nick de Vries, who was rubbish, but now Nick de Vries is gone. So, you know, all of the heat was on Nick de Vries and whether Nick de Vries should be in Formula One. Then they got rid of him. And then all of that heat moved across to Logan Sargent. So then he was under the scrutiny lamp of the Formula One fan base. And now you've got Liam Lawson coming in, but Liam Lawson has been really good. Like Liam Lawson, Zandvoort had a horrible Zandvoort to try and get through, right? Just had mixtures of intermediate tires, wet tires, then slick tires in kind of drying conditions, back to intermediates again. Like, it was absolutely crazy for Liam Lawson to be part of that race as his first race in Formula One. But he actually did really well. And we saw in Monza last time out, got an 11th place finish, did really well, like to keep hold of that 11th place, and actually finished ahead of Logan Sargent, ahead of Oscar Piastri, although Piastri's race was kind of ruined by Lewis Hamilton. And then, yeah, you come into this weekend, another qualifying session hasn't gone Sargent's way. I don't know. I feel like Logan Sargent will probably stay next year. but just because James Vowles and Williams kind of want a driver of their own in there, but is it worth it? So there's 3 seats left on the grid, right? The 2 AlphaTauri seats technically not confirmed for next year, and that Williams spot, and everybody else is already confirmed. So they're the 3 seats that you can fill. You'd imagine Yuki Tsunoda will get one of those AlphaTauri seats. But then Liam Lawson's been very good, and Daniel Ricciardo brings all of the commercial value. So Red Bull have a big decision on their hands. Like, they've kind of got like 3 drivers, 2 seats, and that doesn't fit. That doesn't fit unless they like work out a way to spread out the seats between them. They're like, okay, we've got 24 races next season, so 48 races, and out of those 48 races, you're gonna have 15, you're gonna have 15, you're gonna have 15, and the other 3 we'll kind of sort out when we get them. I think Lawson is on the level of Joe, but definitely not Yuki or Albon. Yeah, but Joe is good. Joe is good. Joe is a good Formula 1 driver. Don't get me wrong, he's not going to be like a world champion anytime soon, or maybe even ever get a podium. I doubt that Joe will ever get a podium in his Formula 1 career. That doesn't mean you're a bad driver. Nico Hulkenberg hasn't got a podium. Nico Hulkenberg is one of the best drivers. Like, he's been in and around the sport. The longevity tells you that he is a very, very good driver without ever getting a podium. Why I don't get with the red flag, why aren't the stewards not looking into that max error, dish out a penalty already instead of waiting until the end of the session? That is a good point. They always kind of do that in qualifying, though. They always leave everything to the end of the session. Like the impeding of Lance Stroll by Logan Sargent, they're going to look at after. They could have looked at it now, but technically, because they've already said that they're going to look at it after, I don't know if they're allowed to like take that back. Interesting, though. Don't see Ricciardo placing Perez next year. No, me neither. Me neither. I don't see any of those AlphaTauri drivers replacing Perez. I feel like Red Bull will go for the bigger. Like, I feel like Red Bull would try and get even a Norris or a Piastri, either of those 2, before they go to the AlphaTauri drivers. It's just whether or not they can convince them, right? I feel like they're just as much as Red Bull have a surplus of drivers, a lot of them are not good enough, but you worry would falter under the pressure a little bit of going straight into that Red Bull seat. I guess that's the one thing that Daniel Ricciardo has, is that he's been in a big team before. He's been under that pressure before of being like the big name driver in a team. He was that at Renault. So Daniel Ricciardo would probably have the best mindset going into that second seat at Red Bull. But I feel like we've even seen it with Sergio Perez, the pressure that you're under at Red Bull to perform every single weekend at a level which is insane, right? You have to kind of be at Max Verstappen's level or just below every single race, which is an incredibly high level to be set at. But you are in the fastest car, so it's kind of goes both ways. Yeah, it's taken a little while, this red flag, although it was a huge, huge incident. Almost caught Oscar Piastri in it as well, actually, now I look at the replay. But yeah, Lance Stroll is a big, big crash. And I think they've only just been able to replace the Tech Pro barrier that is on the right-hand side of that final corner. None of Lawson's results have been on his pace. Right place, right time, staying out of trouble. I agree to an extent. I feel like his pace hasn't been horrendous. His pace has kind of been where I'd expect it to be of a driver who's had zero testing before the season has started and has only been thrown into a Grand Prix car midway through a Zandvoort race where it was very tricky, and then going to Monza where the AlphaTauri is kind of 50-50 at best. But I feel like when it comes to Liam Lawson, the fact that he has been consistent and has been able to stay out of trouble, as you say, is actually a huge positive. Because a lot of the times we talk about rookies and we talk about the fact that they don't stay out of trouble. Sargent has been in the wall quite a lot. Nick De Vries was in the wall all the time. Nick De Vries hit the wall like 3 times in a weekend at Baku, didn't he? Or something silly. 2 times in a weekend. Like, just being clean is an underappreciated thing, I think, in Formula One. Being a clean driver that keeps things on the road. I mean, that's why Mick Schumacher lost his seat. It's what Haas were looking for. Haas just needed clean drivers. Drivers that were going to keep the car on the track and not destroy them within an inch of their life. So Nico Hulkenberg got a seat because he is just a clean, precise driver. I feel like Zhou Guanyu is in that similar category, right? Like Alfa Romeo aren't keeping Zhou Guanyu because they think he's going to be a future world champion. There's just he hasn't shown that level of ability, but they are keeping him because he has shown he's good enough and a very clean, consistent driver. Whereas, do you risk that? Do you gamble on a driver that maybe won't be that? You know, as much as we love Théo Pourchaire, and don't get me wrong, I'd absolutely love to see Théo Pourchaire in that seat. During this transitional period where Alfa Romeo still need to be a little bit, Sauber next year definitely need to be a little bit sort of conservative with the money that they spend on the car and where they spend that money. Having to spend it on a driver that Théo Pourchaire might be and that smashes the car up every 2 or 3 Grand Prix, I don't think they can risk that. Whereas Zhou Guanyu isn't going to smash up the car. Like, Liam Lawson isn't going to smash up the car because he's proven it now. He's done 2-3 weekends where he's just been really clean the whole time. Okay, he took a little bit of damage. Messed up a front wing. But who doesn't? Generally speaking, his racecraft has been very, very clean. But yeah, I feel like Liam Lawson's an interesting one right now because he's doing well enough. Whether or not the AlphaTauri team will think about... Oh, George Russell. George was there. That incident with Max Verstappen on the radio. Oh, Charles Leclerc was there as well, actually. Wow, okay. So Verstappen stopping at the end of the pit lane. It was traffic. GP kind of pointing to Max Verstappen. Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. Being clean is a good thing if you're in. But where do you kind of see AlphaTauri as a team? Are they not in that same bracket with Haas and Alfa Romeo? I mean, they are right now in the constructor standings. They're literally right at the bottom with those two. And they're 19 points off Williams. Cannot see AlphaTauri getting 19 points very quickly. Mazepin for McLaren 2025 now. There is an interesting take. There is an interesting take. Mazepin, the return to F1 for him, I just feel like it just can't happen. As funny as it would be just to see him back on the grid, because it would just be painful. He was nowhere near good enough. I feel like Formula One has gone through a weird kind of influx of rookies that haven't been good enough recently. Like, if you look at the rookies since that season, right, where Norris, Russell, Albon all came through at the same time. If you look at, like, post that season, who have we had? Mick and Mazepin, Latifi, Joe, Sargent, De Vries. None of them are, like, wow drivers. Piastri, I feel like, has been a real breath of fresh air. It's the first rookie in a long time where I've been like, thank God this man is here. He's actually going to do well for the foreseeable future. Here we go then. We're back underway. 15 minutes of Q2 in front of us. The Red Bull cars coming out first. Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez coming out. Max should get a penalty. It does look pretty suspicious, that from Max. He was just stationary for so long, and there were 4 or 5 cars behind him. At first, I thought it was only the 2 Mercedes because of the angle that we saw. Actually, it's the 2 Mercedes. Leclerc's there was an Aston Martin there as well. I think Fernando probably. Like, there was a lot of cars trying to get out of the pit lane, and Max Verstappen was just kind of sitting there waiting. The gap will be closer next year. Albon last year, similar situation. Yeah, that's true. That is true. That's true. It will be very difficult to score points next year. I feel like P10 is going to be so competitive next season. Only if Mazepin buys a team. True. Maybe he gets in like an Andretti team, you know. If Andretti finally become that 11th team that we've been promised for so long now, that eventually does happen, maybe then Mazepin gets himself a seat in like a brand new team just because they need the finances. But I don't think he's keeping himself in shape as Mazepin. He's not racing still, is he? So you do lose your super license points over time. It's only the last 3 seasons, I think, that your super license points count for. Or is it the last 3 seasons that you've raced in? Because obviously Fernando Alonso took 2 years out, but was still eligible. But maybe you just had enough from 1 season. You can get enough super license points in 1 season in Formula 1. Because the super license points available in Formula 1 are very, very high, as you can imagine. Here we go then. A complete reset for the top 15. Will Yuki Tsunoda hang on to provisional pole position in Q2? We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, gutted for Bottas, Piastri, Sargent, and Joe. Didn't really get an opportunity to show their true pace at the end there. They'll start 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th. Lance Stroll was the driver to cause the red flag. He lost his Aston Martin on the outside of the final corner. Caused a big, big collision with the barrier. And that Aston Martin car is going to take some putting back together again if they're going to be prepared for the race tomorrow. But we have our top 15, and the top 15 will now battle it out, starting with the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, who we are on board with right now. Current World Championship leader, 10 races, victories in a row, trying to make it 11 here in Singapore in a Red Bull car that he's not 100% happy with, it has to be said. Really struggled so far this weekend, was very upset about the amount of traffic as well during Q1. Just found that he wasn't able to really put in a respective lap time of what he was able to truly get out of that Red Bull. But the 2 Red Bulls going out as fast as they can as soon as the session started to get in their lap times early. And it does count to get a lap time in early, as we saw. You know, had Piastri got a slightly better early lap time in, had Sargent got a slightly better early lap time in, maybe we'd be looking at them in this session. But no. Max Verstappen now coming through the second sector. So it's the fastest second sector, of course. but he's just struggling. The front end of that Red Bull car is all over the shop. Kevin Magnussen has just gone quicker than Max Verstappen in the middle sector. Goodness me. Shall I show you the sector times? It would make more sense, wouldn't it? But yeah, Kevin Magnussen's just gone quicker than Max Verstappen in the middle sector. Verstappen a 132.3. A little bit quicker than Q1, but not an insane time, especially as Kevin Magnussen's just gone 0.2 quicker in a Haas. Kevin Magnussen goes fastest. Carlos Sainz currently fastest in the first and second sector. It just feels like Lando Norris is on for something a little bit special here this weekend. 131.9 puts him top of the standings right now. Sergio Perez actually slower than his teammate by 0.03 of a second. Carlos Sainz, though, comes along and takes top spot right now in his Ferrari. Is Charles Leclerc going to be able to do better? No. Fernando Alonso has gone fastest in the middle sector. It's a fairly decent first sector as well from Fernando. Is he going to go quickest? Yes, he is indeed. Just 0.05 of a second quicker than Carlos Sainz. But you can see, made up that time in the middle sector. In particular, Fernando Alonso going quickest. Sainz still quickest in the first sector, though. Let's see Sergio Perez. Little replay of his Red Bull. Ooh. Rides the curb there. Gets all over it. And lots of dust. Then thrown up by the Red Bull car. Gasly in an Alpine. Where's he currently? It's not a terrible first and second sector from Pierre Gasly. Quicker than he's been all day in those first two. Where's he going to slot himself in? Goes quicker than the Red Bulls. And just behind his teammate Esteban Ocon. By 1,000th of a second. Wow, okay. Goes just behind his teammate Esteban Ocon by the smallest possible margin. Yuki Tsunoda coming back into the pits. And that AlphaTauri doesn't sound incredibly healthy, going to be honest. Bottas and Ocon would be perfect for McLaren. Where's Piastri gone in your mind? Bottas would be a fairly decent pickup, I feel like, though. Red Bull gives me false hope that they're bad this weekend. Tom, we have to believe, Tom. They're currently 8th and 9th fastest. They might not even make it out of Q2. Imagine they don't make it out of Q2. George Russell then. Let's see what he can do in the first sector. Quickest. 26.9. Hello. Needs a really solid middle sector though, George Russell. And then he's right on it for the top spot here. Lewis Hamilton matches Fernando Alonso's first sector exactly, but is a better first sector for Lewis than he did before. So everyone is improving as the track continues to evolve. That was very, very smooth from George Russell there as he comes to the end of the second sector, and it's very quick indeed. 0.5 of a second in front of Nico Hülkenberg, who is currently the 10th place driver. Although I feel like we're looking at the top of the standings for George Russell as opposed to just 10th place in this one. Final couple of corners for George Russell. A final left-hander. And goes quickest. About 1/10 of a second quicker than Fernando Alonso. Lewis Hamilton then, can he go even quicker than his teammate? Hasn't been a quicker first or second sector from Lewis and only goes 5th fastest in the Mercedes car. But again, we're looking at very tight margins. The first 5 cars separated by 0.3 of a second. And Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez, you'll notice, 10th and 11th place. Tsunoda on the radio. And being held up, Yuki Tsunoda. And another impeding from Max Verstappen in front of Yuki Tsunoda. Max Verstappen is on for a pretty swift slap across the wrists from the stewards, impeding not once but twice now. Thank you, Connor Wallace, for your subscription. Appreciate that, mate. Thank you. We're on our way to like 12k now. We've had a good little week in terms of subscriptions and stuff. On a good little march towards 12k. So Perez, Hulkenberg, Lawson, and Albon, 4 drivers that have been able to set a lap time and just aren't quite quick enough right now. Yuki Tsunoda had to give up on that lap because of Max Verstappen impeding in front of him. So Yuki Tsunoda deciding to just come back into the pits early. But we're looking for our top 10 in this qualifying session then. Who is going to be good enough to get through into Q3 and fight for pole position here in Singapore? Last weekend, no, 2 weekends ago, we saw a Ferrari on pole position with Carlos Sainz. Will it be them again? Last year, we saw a Ferrari on pole position in Singapore. Fernando Alonso, second fastest driver right now, although we're seeing a lot of busy Aston Martin mechanics on the other side of the garage already trying to piece together what they can do to try and get Lance Stroll into the race tomorrow. He will obviously start from the back of the grid, I'd imagine. We'll probably have to start from the pit lane because there are a few parts I'm sure they want to change on the Aston Martin. But that is for tomorrow. Today, we've got 4 minutes left of this Q2 session and a lot of cars now coming out of their garages. There is Fernando Alonso, as we mentioned, Aston Martin just coming out in front of Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc as well, also coming down the pit lane altogether. Liam Lawson just ahead of Max Verstappen. They exit the pit lane together. Oof. Carlos Sainz. Ooh, Carlos Sainz had to slam the brakes on there. Max Verstappen coming down the pit lane and a little bit of almost an unsafe release from Carlos Sainz there, although both drivers got out incredibly well and are now on track. The Mercedes deciding to give everyone else a little bit of space. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton just making their way down the pits as well. But let's see. This looks like it will be a lot more exciting unless Max pulls it out of the bag at the end. Hey, we can all believe. Let's all just have a little bit of faith that maybe Max Verstappen is actually struggling as much as it looks like he is. He's trying to find a little bit of space, though, Max Verstappen. He came out behind Liam Lawson, then was overtaken by an Alpine, it looks like. Now jumping in front of the Alpine and the AlphaTauri of Yuki Tsunoda. So Max Verstappen now behind Nico Hulkenberg, just trying to find a spot in this traffic. 2 minutes left to go in the session. More than enough time to do a couple of laps if you get around this final sector in a fairly swift manner. I feel like this is going to be a one and done from Max Verstappen. And here we are then. Max Verstappen starting his flying lap for this Q2 session. The top 10, remember, make it through into Q3. And Max Verstappen currently is only just in the top 10. Oh, and already a little slide from Max Verstappen in the first couple of corners. Still struggling for that grip in the front end. The front end is just sliding around, and already Max Verstappen 0.3 of a second down on George Russell in that first sector. And a poor first sector means that it's much slower than his previous first sector, Max Verstappen. This is really bad for Max. This is like realistically could be knocked out here. Verstappen going around. There's a yellow flag in the first sector. Oh, and that's Sergio Perez. Perez is definitely going to be out then. He's already 11th. And he can't improve. So Sergio Perez is gone. And Verstappen is not a vintage middle sector from Max Verstappen either, by the way. The Red Bull just looks so difficult to drive around here. Hulkenberg goes into 6th place. And Max Verstappen only goes 10th fastest. That's not going to be enough. Yuki Tsunoda's going to be flying. Pierre Gasly is just behind. Gasly takes the checkered flag, not quick enough. Yuki Tsunoda, oh no, has struggled. Liam Lawson slow through the first sector. He comes across the line, Liam Lawson! Come on! Out of the session is Liam Lawson, who drops the Red Bulls. Ouch. Oh. Carlos Sainz goes quickest, but wow. The talking point, the Red Bull Junior driver, Liam Lawson, snatches the top 10 position from Max Verstappen. Seven thousandths of a second. Wow. Verstappen and Perez both out. Yuki Tsunoda also with no time set. Struggled to get the best out of his AlphaTauri car. Albon goes 14th fastest. Gasly in 12th. But the big talking point, Verstappen and Perez. Wow. Just sliding the front end. The front end of that Red Bull just so slippery on the exit of corners. So this is the first time that we've seen a Red Bull on pace drop out of this qualifying. And neither Red Bull driver very happy at all with the setup of the car. Max Verstappen jumping out of the car before they even get it back into the garage. Absolutely livid, Max Verstappen, and is walking away up the pit lane and deciding to just go and calm down, I'd imagine. We have to remember that Max Verstappen is also under investigation for impeding as well. So this could go from bad to worse for Max Verstappen. It's 11th place at best for Max Verstappen. Our top 10, though, Sainz, Russell, Alonso, Magnussen, Norris, Hulkenberg, Leclerc, Hamilton, and Ocon. And of course, Liam Lawson will go through to our top 10 shootout. Haas and Red Bull have swapped cars. Yeah, Magnussen and Hulkenberg both in there. Huge, huge dynamic shift. Obviously, the Ferraris and the Red Bulls... the Ferraris and the Mercedes cars will be looking at this and will be absolutely ecstatic, hoping that this is the time that they can get the real best out of their car this weekend. It's a proper opportunity to win a race this season, which you have to argue they haven't really had at any point. Any other team hasn't won a race this season and hasn't really had an opportunity to. This feels like a big opportunity for those guys to actually win a Grand Prix. Even if you're Lando Norris, you're looking at the possibility of your first win in Formula One now. This is going to be a very tense final qualifying session. All the Max curses gathered up for Singapore. I mean, he's broken a lot of the curses, like Bahrain and Monza and so on and so on and so on. Can Ferrari sue Red Bull for copyright? For what? What have they done? Just throw. Oh, is that a throwing away the weekend? Okay. Is that Lawson throwing away his seat? Yeah. To be fair, they're not going to be very happy at Liam, are they? Taking that opportunity. Or is that an opportunity of Liam Lawson now saying, I am the best. I'm the best of the Red Bull drivers. Liam Lawson is currently the fastest Red Bull car on track. Yuki Tsunoda 15th, Sergio Perez 13th, Verstappen 11th. So Liam Lawson will start at the top of the standings in terms of those Red Bull cars tomorrow. Oh, Sergio Perez. Huge understeer. Yeah, you can see just huge understeer and then has to get on the brakes even longer. Spins the car around to try and stop it from just barreling into the barriers. And Verstappen also comes through that first sector all over the curbs. And the front end just slipping around. Just feels like it has absolutely no traction whatsoever, that front end of the Red Bull. Max Verstappen has come out of the back of the Red Bull garage. He's probably going to be walking towards his hospitality. Helmet off, race suit off. Sergio Perez also out as well. Is following suit and following Max Verstappen to the Red Bull hospitality. Neither of the drivers spending very much time in the garage with the team. And it will be a complete reset for Red Bull, you'd imagine. And a very difficult debrief come sort of 25 minutes time when I imagine Christian Horner will have to make his way over and experience the thunder that will be Max Verstappen after that session. There's Charles Leclerc also looking at the possibility of another pole position. We know he can get pole position here in Singapore. Will he be able to do it this weekend? The Mercedes team, the pressure now is really on Ferrari and Mercedes to deliver something here. They know that the Red Bulls are completely out of the way now. Either of them could go on to win this Grand Prix, and it could all come down to who gets pole position. We know it's difficult to overtake here in Singapore. Not impossible, but difficult to overtake. The Ferraris coming out of the pit garage together then. Lando Norris slots in between Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. And they are just going to wait at the end of the pit lane. Of course, red light still on at the end of the pit lane. Qualifying has not yet started. But already we have a queue of 6 cars in the pit lane ready to go. The Haas of Kevin Magnussen is first in the queue. Nico Hulkenberg just behind. Fernando Alonso also there. Liam Lawson waiting to pounce from the AlphaTauri garage just to the right-hand side as well. Everybody wants to get out, make sure they've got a time set. We've already seen one red flag. We know that there is an ability for a red flag to happen here. Failing to slow under yellow flag. Charles Leclerc will be investigated after the session has ended. That would be very, very annoying if Charles Leclerc has picked up a penalty for not slowing quickly enough under yellow flags. I get how Singapore won't suit the Red Bull, but how do they screw up that bad? Not even get into Q3. Just the front end of the car. I don't know. I can't remember now. I haven't got it in my notes. I've written it down on the race stats that I keep. But I can't remember if Red Bull have brought any front wing upgrades this weekend, because the front wing just looks nowhere near, like, it's not pushing the front end of the car down enough, and that front end of the car is just wiggling around as they come out of the corner. It's almost like the rear tires are getting traction and trying to push the car forwards, but the front end is still unstable at the point that it is, and it's just causing the front end of the Red Bull to completely shift out of position. And where you're trying to get the power down, obviously you want to be in a straight line. You want to get as much power down in a perfect straight line as you possibly can when you're in these cars, because that's where you're going to get the most traction. Therefore, you're going to be able to get the most acceleration out of the corner. But whilst the front end is still wiggling around, you just can't get the power down in the same way. Alonso, of course, been climbing the steps of the podium all season. Huge opportunity for him to win his first Grand Prix in a very, very long time as well. What would have been 10 years since Fernando Alonso last won a Grand Prix in Formula One. Carlos Sainz, 4 career pole positions, of course. Was on pole last weekend. Could do 2 in a row. But is currently having a little drag race with Lando Norris towards the final sector and loses out. Lando Norris is going to go in front of the Ferrari, although the Ferrari can slow down quite a chunk. Get himself prepared as he comes around the final couple of left-hand corners. And we are underway then in Q3. We're going to see 2 flying laps from each of these drivers you'd expect. And this is the first one, Carlos Sainz. Doesn't want to go through that dirty air of Lando Norris, and I think has just about left himself enough gap. He has indeed. Let's see then as these cars come through. Lando Norris, quickest in the first sector, 26.8. But Magnussen, Alonso, Sainz goes just a touch slower than Lando Norris. 0.05 of a second is just a touch, in my opinion. Nico Hulkenberg, a 39.0 through the middle sector. I'm waiting for that Lando Norris middle sector lap time to come through. And we can compare directly to Carlos Sainz. Fernando Alonso with a 39 dead as well through that middle sector. Kevin Magnussen comes across the line, sets the standard at 132.3. You'd imagine that'll be very easily surpassed by a lot of these cars now coming around. Carlos Sainz does get the quicker of the middle sectors compared to Lando Norris, after George Russell has also taken the fastest first sector. Alonso goes top of the standings at 132.1, a little bit more like it. But Carlos Sainz is going to go 130. Oh, no, sorry. Lando Norris, 131.5. 0.6 of a second over Fernando Alonso. And Sainz goes even quicker still. 0.3 of a second there, Carlos Sainz. That is a mesmeric middle sector that Carlos Sainz has put in. I think has been the difference there. It is. And Charles Leclerc also puts his Ferrari second. Just having a little look. Carlos Sainz so quick in the middle sector, isn't he? He's got like 0.2 over Leclerc and Norris. Wow. Russell quickest in the first sector, though, and a good middle sector, I should say. Russell goes 4th fastest of everybody. Fastest first sector, but again, losing out on that middle sector. Carlos Sainz just be able to find so much time in that second sector. Hamilton slots in just behind his teammate, goes 5th fastest. Alonso then in 6th. So it is Sainz, Leclerc, Norris, Russell, Hamilton, Alonso, Magnussen, Hulkenberg, Ocon and Lawson, the current standings as we see them. And Ferrari will be more than happy to take that as we head to the halfway point of this session. 12 minutes, of course, Q3, 6 minutes about left to go. The cars are going to come back into the pits once again. You'd imagine another fresh set of soft compound tyres. So let's see, Ferrari were the only tyres there that were completely new. Will this new layout generate more overtakes? Not really. Because the overtaking, like the corners that they've taken out, don't really lend themselves to overtaking anyway. I suppose it will allow you to carry a little bit more speed through the final sector and maybe not lose so much time in the dirty air of cars behind. So possibly down towards turn 1, we'll see a little bit more overtaking. There is a very short DRS zone there down towards turn 1. But it's not going to have a huge impact, I don't think. They will just help out a little bit with, obviously, the cars following one another through that final sector. Carlos Sainz then, provisional pole position for the Ferrari driver. Just wipes a bit of sweat off of his brow, prepares for a final run. But yeah, I think Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc were the only drivers there to run a completely fresh set of softs for that qualifying outing. Everybody else went on at least a scrubbed set of softs. So we haven't seen the out-and-out pace of everybody as of yet. That might be why it looks like Carlos Sainz is a lot quicker than the likes of Lando Norris and George Russell, for instance. Although making up 0.3 and 0.6 of a second is going to be very tricky. Ferrari preparing their drivers once again. Going to go with about 4 minutes left. Oh no, gone a little bit earlier than I thought. 4 minutes and 20 seconds left to go, and the Ferraris go out first. Affable. Could you shout me out? Sure. There you go. Again, it was interesting. You'd assume that the drivers would want to be last over the line because the track has been evolving so much because of the rain earlier on today. But maybe they've seen kind of a plateau in the track evolution, and they're not too concerned about being last out on track. There is another set of brand new tyres on the Ferrari. You can tell by just the sheen that these soft compound tyres have when they come straight out of the blankets, and they are fresh. Carlos Sainz looks like he could be a real threat to the win on Sunday. Definitely. I mean, he was the closest to winning in Monza last weekend. I know that isn't actually that close, considering when Max Verstappen did get into the lead, he just disappeared off into the distance. But Carlos Sainz looking really solid. Actually, since the summer break, I don't know what Carlos Sainz did over the summer break, but he's come back and is absolutely flying in that Ferrari. Charles Leclerc just separating from Carlos Sainz now. It's actually the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso leading this little mini pack. The Hasses were the first to come out together. So we've got Magnussen and Hulkenberg with Alonso, and then Sainz and Leclerc, and everybody's just trying to give themselves a tiny little bit of a gap. You want about sort of 4 or 5 seconds to the car in front of you, realistically. But Alonso is not moving very fast away from Carlos Sainz. And Charles Leclerc is just behind this pack as well, so I think Carlos Sainz is going to slow right down, try and let Fernando Alonso eke out a little bit of a gap. But I want to see the sector times as they come through, because this is going to be, you'd imagine, incredibly close. Ferrari looking the most likely to do it. But throughout this entire qualifying session, we've seen the top 4, 5, 6 drivers separated by just a couple attempts. Could be incredibly close. And it will be all about who can get precise lap time in. Carlos Sainz does indeed start his flying lap. Lando Norris just behind also starts his first flying lap in the McLaren on a fresh set of soft compound tyres. Come on, Lando. Charles Leclerc starts his lap just behind Lando Norris too. So Sainz, Norris and Leclerc are the three to be watching. Carlos Sainz 0.2 of a second quicker than himself in the first sector. Lando Norris going quick as well. This is going to be close. This is going to be very, very close indeed. And Charles Leclerc right in the mix as well. There are hundredths of a second between the three of them coming through this first sector. Come on, Lando. It's basically identical times through the first sector now that I'm looking through it. Carlos Sainz coming through the second sector. It's not great from Carlos Sainz through the middle sector. A 38.4. That is not as good as he was last time around. Lando Norris, quicker. No, 38.6. And Charles Leclerc, super quick through the middle sector. Leclerc looking quickest right now. Leclerc. Sainz goes 130.9. Lando Norris, it's not going to be that. No, 131.2. Yeah, it was not going to be good enough. Charles Leclerc, though, is an interesting one. Quickest in the middle sector. No! Second fastest from Charles Leclerc. That final sector from Charles Leclerc just not quite up to the standard. Now, George Russell is smelling blood. George Russell quickest in the middle sector, which is where Carlos Sainz was the best overall. Although Charles Leclerc also was quick through the middle sector as well and lost out. George Russell looking so quick. Oh, it's so close. Second place for George Russell. Lewis Hamilton, 5th fastest. Oh, man, I thought that might be it from George Russell, you know. That was such a clean lap from George Russell. It was so close. But yeah, the final sector, Carlos Sainz was just so good in that final sector. Just really hooked it up. It's a very short final sector as well, but just hooked it up perfectly. Wow. So Sainz, Russell, Leclerc will be our top three. Lando Norris, Lewis Hamilton, Kevin Magnussen, Fernando Alonso, Esteban Ocon, Nico Hulkenberg, and Liam Lawson will start ahead of Max Verstappen in 11th place. Gasly, Perez, Albon, Tsunoda, Bottas, Piastri, Sargent Joe, and hopefully Lance Stroll will also take part in tomorrow's Grand Prix in that order. Lance Stroll, I'd imagine, will be starting from the pit lane after causing a red flag in Q1, completely destroying his Aston Martin car. Charles Leclerc, a little bit frustrated, knew that it was there for him, Charles Leclerc. Knew he had done something a little bit special in the middle sector as well. Although George Russell even quicker in the middle sector, but as they said, final sector from Carlos Sainz was just the one. He was like a 1/10 of a second quicker than everybody. Really good race is set up for tomorrow. Sainz, Russell, Leclerc, Norris, Hamilton are top 5. Any of those in the mix for the victory, you'd imagine. Magnussen, Alonso, Ocon, Hulkenberg, Lawson, all will start in the points positions, and Max Verstappen will start 11th at best. We have to remember, a couple of investigations also to come for Max Verstappen. Carlos Sainz is very happy indeed to take that one. But yeah, I'm going to disappear because obviously we're a little bit longer than normal in that we had to wait for Lance Stroll's car to be removed, that red flag to fully take its toll on the qualifying session. But we are set up for probably the most exciting qualifying, the most exciting start to a race we've seen in a long time, because the qualifying here has just left everybody all over the place. Especially because Max Verstappen isn't up there. Anything could happen. Sainz once again better than Charles. Very underrated. Carlos Sainz is so good. I feel like I am always on this kind of train of trying to convince people that Carlos Sainz is insanely good. George Russell's brakes overheating and didn't want his Mercedes car to catch fire, to George Russell, so gets the fans on those brakes as soon as he possibly can. Carlos Sainz. Come on! Oh, I'd love Carlos to win tomorrow. I'd love Lando to win even more. My tier list right now is like Lando win, Carlos win. Oh, be so good. Jamie, thank you so much, mate. Thank you all for joining me. Appreciate everybody coming in, taking part. Toto Wolff wandering towards George Russell to congratulate him on a front row start for Mercedes, but we will have to wait and see what happens tomorrow. Thank you guys so much. I will be live again tomorrow before the Grand Prix gets underway, about half an hour before the Grand Prix gets underway. So I'd love to see you then. And yeah, I will see you tomorrow.